10 years is a long time. Babies are born, people die, families move. The federal census only catches your ancestors every decade, but in many states there's another record that catches them in between. Today, we're talking about state censuses. I'm Tanya with Beyond Generations Genealogy, and today we're going to dig into what state censuses are, where to find them, and how they can completely transform your research. I'll use real examples from my own family in Minnesota and Iowa, but I'll cover the big picture for the whole country because this applies to you no matter where your ancestors lived. Let's get into it. Oh, and if you'd rather have all of this in front of you while you research instead of pausing the video, I put together a printable handout with every link, tip, and step that I cover today. It is linked in the description below. All right. First, let's talk about what a state census actually is. The United States federal government has conducted a census every 10 years since 1790. That's the one that everyone knows about. But for much of American history, individual states also conducted their own censuses, usually on a 5-year cycle, landing right between the federal years. So instead of a 10-year gap in your records, in many states, you might have a gap of only 5 years. States conducted these censuses for their own purposes, tracking population growth, serving state and local government needs, and in some cases, substituting for federal years when early territorial counts were needed. They weren't required to use the same format as the federal census, which means they sometimes asked completely different questions, and sometimes more detailed ones. Now, here's the important caveat up front. Not every state conducted a separate census, and the ones that did weren't consistent about it. Some states only did it once or twice, others did it for decades. The availability and survival of those records varies enormously. But for the states and years where they do exist, they are absolutely worth searching. So rather than me rattling off a list of states and years, let me show you how to find out for yourself whether a state census exists for your ancestors' state and time period. I'm going to head over to FamilySearch, which is free to use. So from the FamilySearch homepage, you'll click on Search in the top menu, then choose Research Wiki from the dropdown, and in the search box type United States State Census and hit Enter. This brings you to the FamilySearch Wiki page for the United States State Census records. This is also a page you're going to want to bookmark. You can see that this page lists every state. What you're going to do is click on the state you're researching. So I'm going to choose Minnesota as our example today, since that's one of the families we'll be working with. Once you're on the state page, scroll down until you find the section called Online State and Territorial Censuses. This is the section you want. It lays out each census year that exists for that state, what type of census it was, and importantly, where you can find it online, whether that is FamilySearch, Ancestry, or another repository. So this is your starting point for any state. No guessing, no outdated lists, just come here first. Now, let's zoom in on Minnesota, because this is where a lot of my family's research lives, and it's a fantastic example of how powerful these records can be. Minnesota conducted state censuses on a roughly 5-year cycle between 1849 and 1905, landing right between most federal years. For a family who stayed in Minnesota, that can mean a census snapshot nearly every 5 years. Once Minnesota organized as a territory in 1849, it began conducting its own counts, and beginning in 1865, the regular 5-year state census rhythm really kicks in. So, as I showed you earlier, the best place to find out where Minnesota's state censuses are available online is that FamilySearch Wiki page. It will point you to Ancestry, FamilySearch, and other repositories, depending on what year you're looking for. Now, I want to show you what these records actually look like using my own ancestors. The family I'm going to use as our example is my 2 times great-grandparents' family, Johann Daniel Jaroshefske and his family, who later shortened their name to Shaske. They were German immigrants who settled in Holden Township, Goodhue County, Minnesota. and they stayed there for decades. When I'm researching this family, I have access to the following census records. I've got the 1870 federal, 1875 Minnesota State, 1880 federal, 1885 Minnesota State. The 1890 census I do not have access to because it was almost entirely destroyed, but more on that in a moment. I've got access to the 1895 state census, 1900 federal census, 1905 state, and 1910 federal. Do you see what just happened? So instead of only 4 federal snapshots across 40 years, I have 8 snapshots of this family. That's a record every 5 years, and each one fills in critical gaps that others leave blank. Let me walk you through what each state census gave me. So let's start with the 1885 state census. Right away, the first thing you'll notice is the name spelling. I find the Jaroshefske household in Goodhue County, Holden Township. It's recorded as Jaroshefske with a Y at the end. This is one of many spelling variations you'll encounter with a difficult surname like this one. Without knowing to look for alternate spellings, you might miss this record entirely. So the 1885 census lists the household as John, Laurentina, John, who's John Jr., Augusta, August, Louisa, Mary, Ernestina, and Juliana, a large family. This record documents Johann Daniel's second wife, Laurentina, also called Laurentine, who he married after his first wife, Juliana Schultz, died in 1881. The federal census in 1880 shows Juliana still alive. So without the 1885 state census, I would have no census record at all of this major family change, the father's remarriage, until 1900. So let's look at what's documented here. John Jr., my second times great-grandfather, is listed at home in 1885. He is 19 years old, and we know from other records that by 1892 he's clerking in Nerstrand. The 1885 state census gives us one of the last snapshots of him living at the family home before he strikes out on his own. Now, this one is exceptional. The 1895 state census shows 2 families on the same page. One for August Shaske, who was John's brother, and one for John Shaske. Look at what the 1895 census tells us. For August's family, August, Angel, William, Minnie, and Tilly. The next generation is already established. For John's family, John, Laurentine, John Jr., Augusta, August, Louise, Mary, Ernestina, Julia, and Eddie, a household of 10 people, including more children than appear in either neighboring federal census. But here's the thing I love about the 1895 census for Minnesota. It asks additional questions beyond the federal census, including how long a person has been a resident of the state and how long a resident of the current enumeration district. So these residency questions can help you figure out when an immigrant arrived or when a family relocated within the state. And look at the surname again in 1895, Shaske with a Y. Compare that to 1885's Jaroshefske, 1885's Jaroshefske, and the family's eventual legal name of Shaske. These spelling variations across census years are perfectly normal, especially for non-English surnames, and the state census gives you additional data points to catch your ancestor under multiple spellings. By 1905, the young man, John Jaroshefske, my ancestor, has been married for nearly 9 years. He and his wife, Mary Schmidt, are farming in Holden Township with their children, Clifford, Francis, and Frank. Notice the name is now spelled Jaroshefske, yet another variation. The 1905 census is particularly valuable because it includes the street address or rural free delivery number. So if your ancestor lived in town, that street address can be especially useful. It lets you track them in city directories, locate them on fire insurance maps, and connect records across multiple sources. Before we move on, I want to show you one more state census, the 1915 Iowa state census, because it's genuinely one of my favorites, and it illustrates some important research habits that will save you from missing things. Iowa conducted state censuses on a regular cycle, and the 1915 version is particularly rich. Let me show you what makes it special using my own Woods family. Ernest Woods, my great-great-grandfather, was a farmer in Rock Township, Mitchell County, Iowa in 1915. His brother Mervyn, known as Mert, was farming nearby. Both families showed up in this census, but the way this census is structured requires some extra attention. So, unlike the federal census, where you see a whole family listed together on one page, the 1915 Iowa census gives each person their own card. When you find the census on Ancestry, those cards have been sorted alphabetically by name. So, all the Woods family cards appear together. You might glance at them and assume they're all one household. They're not. Here's the key. Look at the card number in the upper left corner. Ernest's family occupies cards 108 through 113. Mervin's family is cards 271 through 273. Those are two entirely separate households. The cards just happen to sort together alphabetically. So if you're not paying attention to those numbers, you'll misread the whole record. Always check the image before and the image after the one that you're looking at. This is a habit I preach for every census, but it matters especially here. Each person has their own card, and the farm animal data is on a separate card that accompanies the head of the household. So if you only pull Ernest's main card and move on, you'll miss an entire page detailing exactly what livestock was on the farm as of January 1st, 1915. Ernest had 12 calves, 10 milk cows, 7 horses, 200 fowl, and dozens of hogs. That's a working picture of a real Iowa farm in 1915 that you simply won't find on a federal census. What else does this census record that the federal census doesn't? Quite a bit. The 1915 Iowa census asks for church affiliation. Ernest's wife Laura is listed as Baptist. This is the kind of detail that can open up church records you'd never otherwise think to research. Years in the United States and years in Iowa. Ernest had been in Iowa 19 years at the time of the census, which puts his arrival around 1896 and matches the family history that he moved there from Wisconsin. These residency figures are a built-in migration clue. Birthplace of the parents, pointing you back towards immigration origins. Extent of education. Ernest completed the 3rd year of high school. Laura had 3 years of college, which was unusual for a farm wife in 1915 and tells you something meaningful about her. So when you find a census that uses individual cards rather than household sheets, resist the impulse to just grab the head of household and move on. Map the card numbers, identify who belongs to which household, find the supplemental cards, farm animals, registered animals, and look into those too. The richest information in this census isn't on the main card, it's on the one right next to it. I do have to take a moment to talk about 1890 because this is one of the most painful stories in all of American genealogy. The 1890 federal census was almost entirely destroyed in a 1921 fire at the Commerce Department building in Washington, D.C. And what survived the fire was largely destroyed in the cleanup afterward. We lost records for approximately 62 million Americans, an entire decade of the most heavily immigrated, most rapidly changing period in American history. Gone. Only about 1% of the 1890 census survives. Ancestry and FamilySearch have this fragment. There is also a separate 1890 veterans schedule, which enumerated Union veterans and their widows. And that one largely survived. It's also on Ancestry. But here's where state censuses save the day. For states that conducted a census around 1885 or 1895, you can bracket that destroyed 1890 census on both sides. You may not be able to see your ancestor in 1890. But with the 1885 and the 1895 state censuses, you can see them 5 years before and 5 years after. That's not perfect, but it's far better than a 20-year blank. For Minnesota researchers, having both the 1885 and 1895 state censuses makes the loss of 1890 much more manageable. For states like Iowa and Kansas that also had mid-decade enumerations, the same applies. Now, the specific columns and questions vary by state and by year, but here's a general overview of what you might find in a typical state census. Standard information that is nearly always present would be the name of each household member, age, sex, relationship to the head of household in later years, birthplace or state or country of birth, and occupation. Some more state-specific information that you might find that varies kind of by year and state will be things like residency duration, how long they were in the state, how long were they in the current district, the nativity of the parents, where the father and mother were born, citizenship status, whether they were a voter or an alien, number of months employed for some years, rural free delivery number or street address, and whether the person was a soldier or sailor in prior wars. So why does this matter? The residency questions can reveal when a family moved into a county or township, which helps you track migration. And the detailed age information, when combined with other years, helps you resolve birth year discrepancies, which are extremely common across census records. Let me show you one more real-world example from my family research. Mary Clara Schmidt, who became Mary Shaske when she married John in 1896, was born in St. Paul in 1876 to German immigrants Conrad Schmidt and Caroline Meyer. The family later moved to the Nerstrand area in Rice County. In the 1895 Minnesota State Census, I find the Schmidt family in Wheeling Township, Rice County. Conrad, Caroline, Mary, Willie, and Arthur. This is the family just 1 year before Mary marries John Jaroshefske. It confirms where the family is living, it shows Mary's siblings, and it gives us Conrad's occupation as a shoe merchant. Without this 1895 state census, I'd have a gap between the 1880 federal census, when Mary is just 4 years old, and the 1900 federal census, where she's already married and in a different household entirely. The state census fills that gap and documents the whole Schmidt family unit just before it begins to scatter. That's the power of the state census. They catch families in transition. Before we wrap up, I want to make sure you know that state censuses aren't the only extra census records you should be aware of. The federal census system itself produced a whole ecosystem of supplemental schedules that many genealogists never search. Let me give you a quick rundown. So there's the non-population schedules. These were 1850 to 1880. In addition to the regular population schedule, the federal government collected several supplemental schedules, and these are all available on Ancestry. There's the mortality schedules, which listed every person who died in the 12 months preceding the census. If your ancestor died between census years, they might appear here. Agricultural schedules. They document farms with 10 acres or more, and they include acreage, crop values, and livestock. If your ancestor was a farmer, this tells you exactly what they were growing. Manufacturing and industry schedules. These covered businesses and industries, including output and number of workers. And the social statistics schedules covered churches, schools, newspapers, libraries, and pauperism in a given area. They're very useful for social history context. So some other specialized federal census records would be like the 1840 Revolutionary War Pensioner Census, which is a separate enumeration of pensioners from the Revolutionary War. 1850 Federal Slave Schedules. These document enslaved people by slaveholder. So enslaved individuals are listed by age and sex, but not by name. This is a free collection on Ancestry. The 1880 Defective, Dependent, and Delinquent Classes Schedule is a sensitive but historically significant supplemental census, documenting people in almshouses, prisons, hospitals for the insane, and similar institutions. 1888 to 1895 Special Census of Deaf Family Marriages and Hearing Relatives is a unique enumeration for researchers with deaf ancestors. And the 1930 Merchant Seaman Schedule. If you have maritime ancestors, this supplemental schedule from the 1930 census enumerated merchant seamen who were at sea during census time. The point I want you to take away is this. The census is not just one document. It's a system of records, population schedules, state censuses, supplemental schedules, and the genealogist who searches the whole system finds things the genealogist who searches only the population schedule will never find. All right, let's talk strategy. Here's how to actually use state censuses in your research. Check the FamilySearch Wiki every time. Whenever you find your ancestor in a federal census, head to that FamilySearch Wiki page I showed you and check whether a state census exists for that state and time period. Make it part of your standard research routine. Don't rely on the name index. State census enumerators, just like federal enumerators, wrote what they heard, and for an unusual name like Jaroshefske, the indexing is often so far off that a name search simply won't find them. For most of the examples I showed you today, I could not find my ancestor by searching the index at all. Instead, I had to open the census for that county, find the township I expected them to be in, and read through the pages until I found them. It takes more time, but it works. Look at the neighbors. State censuses, just like federal censuses, list households in the order the enumerator walked the neighborhood. Your ancestors' neighbors in the state census are often relatives, in-laws, or people from the same immigrant community. In the 1895 Minnesota census, John Jaroshefske is listed immediately adjacent to his brother August's family, 2 households side by side. Understanding family clusters can open up entirely new research avenues. Compare the same household across census years. Don't just use one census in isolation. Line up all the census records for a household, state and federal, and compare them side by side. You'll catch discrepancies in ages, birthplaces, and family composition that reveal important information. A child present in 1885 but gone in 1895 might have died or gotten married. A child present in 1895 but not 1880 fills in gaps in a family's birth record. Watch for census formats that use individual cards instead of household sheets. The 1915 Iowa State Census is a perfect example. Each person gets their own card, and supplemental data like farm animals appears on a separate accompanying card. When a census is organized this way and digitized on Ancestry, the cards are often sorted alphabetically rather than by household. So always check the card or record number to identify which individuals belong together. And always look at the images immediately surrounding the one you're viewing. You might be one click away from a farm inventory, a church affiliation, or a residency detail that transforms what you know about that family. If your state doesn't have a state census, look for substitutes. Not every state conducted a regular census, but some states have alternative records that fill similar gaps. Tax lists, voter registrations, school censuses, church records, or city directories. And don't forget that some states' records are housed at the state archives, even if they're not fully indexed online. So always reach out to your state historical society. All right, so before you assume that there's nothing between those federal census years, take 5 minutes and check that FamilySearch Wiki page. You might be surprised what's been there all along. A child you didn't know about, a sibling living next door, or a stepmother who entered the family after the last federal census. For my family, the Minnesota state censuses of 1875, 85, 95, and 1905 gave me the complete story of a family in motion, immigrating, building, losing a mother, remarrying, raising children, watching those children grow up and farm the same land. Without those 5-year snapshots, the story would have enormous holes. That's what the state censuses do. They fill in the story. If this video helped you, please hit the like button and subscribe. I release new genealogy research tutorials regularly, and there's always more to dig into. And if you found your ancestor in a state census you didn't know existed, leave a comment and tell me about it. I love hearing what you find. I'll see you in the next video.